Everyone, it's Sara Clarke Kaplan, Executive Director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, welcoming you back for another one of our Fire Right Now Instagram live streams where we respond to racial justice issues in the here and now. And for those of you who've been following along, we are right in the middle of what we are calling Farm Bill Summer. The rest of y'all are having a hot girl or brat girl summer, but right over here, we're still worried about the reauthorization of the U.S. Farm Bill and making sure that that Farm Bill is pointed toward racial justice and meets the needs of communities of color in rural areas across the country. So, I am thrilled to introduce you to the fourth of our sequence and to let you know that today we'll be talking is something that's a big issue for the Farm Bill in general, for farmers across the country, and especially a big issue for those of us working with PACs to make sure that questions of climate and questions of agriculture are understood as joined. So today we'll be talking about conservation and the Farm Bill, farming in particular. So, today we're talking with two organizations. First and foremost, we're speaking with y'all, we're having a few little technical issues, but I think we're working it out here. We're speaking with folks from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and Land Assistance Fund, and also with folks from the Freedman Heirs Foundation. Both of these organizations are crucial to assisting Black farmers, ranchers, and foresters as they achieve the basic forms of equity and support that every farmer needs and deserves, and they've been our partners throughout this process. For those of you who've looked at our Farm Bill Summit toolkit, pointing the Farm Bill toward racial justice, you'll know that that was a publication that we did with the Federation, and that it is their archival photos of Black farmers going back over the years that make that toolkit as beautiful as it is. So we're going to kick off right away and I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. We've got three speakers, and I'm going to let you know who they are in order. First, we've got Tandelyn Daniel, who's the Director of Communication for the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and Land Assistance Fund. Tandelyn Daniel spends her days in the farming and agricultural industry to amplify the voices of Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives as the Director of Communications and Member Relations at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and Land Assistance Fund. And I can tell you from having worked with Tandelyn that she wears a million hats at any given moment and can do everything from communication in the sense of marketing and publicity to making sure that the Black farmers, ranchers, and foresters, who I believe are on this call also, are able to make sure that their voices are heard, their expertise is represented, and their incredible knowledge is shared broadly among each other and with all of us. I'm getting a little feedback from someone, so let's make sure everybody, if y'all can mute anything you're not using right now, that would be great. Second, I want to introduce Freddie Davis III. Freddie Davis is a member of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and is the director of the Rural Training and Research Center at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. In addition to being an experienced agroforester and a researcher and trainer, he counsels clients on how best to generate revenue from their land or property and is an incredible expert in how this can be done in the realms of forest conservation and forest stewardship. And finally, we have Seanicaa Edwards Herron. Seanicaa Edwards Herron is the co-director of the Freedman Heirs Foundation and is a respected agricultural economist with 20 years of experience spanning the academic, private, and government sectors. A long-time agricultural economist for the USDA World Agriculture Outlook Board. Seanicaa Edwards is now the director and founder of Freedman Heirs Foundation, which focuses on transforming U.S. agriculture by bridging the gap between Black farmers and the marketplace, with a vision of eliminating inequities in agriculture and providing Black farmers access to technical assistance, capital, and new market opportunities. So I want to give us a chance, folks, in turn to talk a little bit about where they come into this conversation. because we've got such an incredible set of experts on this. I want you each to get a chance to talk. And I want, Tandelyn, do you want to start first? Just let us know a little bit about the Federation and a little bit of the context and history here, because we all know that the Federation has been around for such a long time and has been such a crucial player, not just in questions of farm justice, but racial justice and civil rights throughout the South. So do you want to talk a little bit about the Federation and some context and history for us here?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Before I do that, very quickly, I want to thank you all for shedding light on the Farm Bill in this way, for being such fantastic partners and always helping to amplify the voices of people who may not have been heard before. So with that, I am Tandelyn Daniel. I'm the Director of Communications and Member Relations here at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. The Federation is a 57-year-old cooperative association of Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives born out of the civil rights movement. And we are here to help folks across the South and in rural communities with cooperative development, land retention, and advocacy. Freddie Davis, who is a colleague of mine, is I cannot wait to get into the conversation you guys are about to have.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to say that, for a very long time, ARPC has talked about how important it is for us to understand that producing knowledge and making change requires partnerships with community-based organizations and grassroots movements, and recognizing the knowledge and expertise out there. And our partnership with the Federation over the last several years, which started even before I took over ARPC, with folks like Dr. Garrett Grady Lovelace, whose class I think is watching right now, is such an example of why it is so important to make these partnerships. I always joke I came into this work as a racial justice organizer and a reproductive justice organizer, and I knew nothing about farming. And it has been farmers and ranchers and organizers and advocates who have taught me everything that I know, which is still not enough, but it has been really life-changing and enlightening. And that is why I feel honored to do these Instagram Lives, and why I think it reminds us that we have to turn to the communities on the front lines if we really want to understand how to create change. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Freddie Davis III. Freddie, will you tell us a little bit about the Rural Training and Research Center for the Federation?
Most definitely. Again, my name is Freddie Davis. I'm the Director of Rural Training and Research Center, located in Epps, Alabama, which is Central West Alabama. And the training center is 1,100 acres, owned by the members of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The purchase of the training center was out of need of access to land that was recognized by the organization. And so out of that, the training center's purpose is to serve as a place for us to demonstrate farming practices that's replicable to those that are members or those in the communities that we serve. It also offers as a place of recreation for the members and the communities. During COVID, the training center was that refuge for families that didn't have access to land, did not have a place to go. So that's what the training center is. So that training center serves as a demonstration area. It serves as the Southern Regional Agroforestry Center in partnership with U.S. Forest Service and NRCS to demonstrate agroforestry practices. In the climate that we're in now, we recognize the importance of forestry and how forestry is going to be one of those resources that help mitigate climate change. The Agroforestry Center is 90% forest land. So we're there to show traditionally forest land has been a resource for African American landowners that we were able to actually use to support families and support lifestyles. And so forestry plays a big part in our community. So that Southern Region Agroforestry Center serves as that resource to demonstrate forestry practices as well as agroforestry practices, as well as specialty crops and things like that. That's the Rural Training and Research Center located in Epps, Alabama.
It's absolutely amazing. And again, I mean, I always am saying how much I did not know. But, you know, I think we often think about farming in a very narrow way. We miss the fact that farming in general, when we talk about agriculture and when we talk about the Farm Bill, includes all of these things like agroforestry, right? That we often don't think about, like ranching, right? That we often don't think about as central to agricultural policy and to the fabric of our food and resource systems in the U.S. So switching from there, I really, you know, Seanicaa, I would love for you to talk about the Freedmen's Heirs Foundation, which I told Seanicaa the first time I met her, I love the name. As somebody who is a scholar of slavery, is one of my fields. The focus on freedmen, the heirs of freedmen in this country is just such a beautiful and important name. So appreciating that and its connection to thinking about heirs property as well. So let's talk about Freedmen Heirs Foundation, please, Seanicaa.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me alongside such a great group of panelists this afternoon. My name is Seanicaa Edwards Herron. I am the founder and executive director of Freedmen Heirs Foundation. We are a nonprofit that focuses on supporting Black farmers through access to capital, access to new market opportunities, and access to technical assistance. Now, we have not been around as long as the Federation. We are a fairly new nonprofit. We're about 4 years old now. However, my connection to agriculture is longstanding. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. metro area. However, I was born and raised in Mississippi, small town called Hernando, and I come from a very long lineage of farmers and agriculturalists. So being a part of agriculture is just a natural progression for me, and the work that I've been able to accomplish over my 20-year professional career. But I wanted to take that information, those networks, that everything that I've learned through expertise, and provide that knowledge back to the community that looks just like me. Knowing farmers in my own community that are surviving, but they want to thrive. And so helping to bring those opportunities to African American farmers across the United States. We do have a regional focus on the South just because concentration and absolute number wise, that's where you have the highest number of farmers, but we work with a plethora of farmers, you know, from row crop producers to fruit and vegetable farmers. As you mentioned, Sarah, we tend to think of farming in one dimension, but it's multifaceted. And a lot of farmers need different um, needs. And so we try our best through the work that we do at Freedmen Heirs Foundation to meet farmers where they are and then help them to think strategically about where they want to go, how they're going to get there, and also thinking about the big picture and long run and wealth generation and making sure that land titles are secure. Like all of these things are very important overall to Black farmers. Everyone knows the staggering statistics of where we are now versus where we were a little bit over 100 years ago. So in absolute terms, it looks as if we are becoming an endangered species, almost extinct. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on the ideas and putting in the work to make sure that these farmers are operating at sustainable levels, but also are economically viable, and they're setting the stage for the next generation of farmers to come behind them.
I love where you ended that, Seanicaa, because there's really two things I want to make sure we pick up on from that. And one, yes, again, right, like this whole series and this whole premise of what we've been doing at ARPC with the Farm Bill has been really emphasizing that there is no opposition between agricultural and land justice, racial justice and climate justice, and that in fact, when we talk about agricultural and land justice, that we are really talking about racial justice, and that when we talk about both of those, we are talking about a crucial foundation for real, true, lasting climate justice. And so it's not enough, and we'll come back to this later, but it's not enough to say we're going to make sure that we protect the environment at the cost of Black farmers and other farmers, and it's not enough to say we're going to protect agriculture at the cost of the environment. You know, as I think Mr. Davis said to me recently, you know, we need good soil to farm, but we also need farmers, right? Everybody has to be able to not just survive, but thrive. And then I also wanted to emphasize, you know, you really brought up that long history of African American farmers and the shrinking numbers that we see every time that there's a census around this. And I want to emphasize to everyone that Black farmers have been part of the fabric, and Black food work and production has been part of the fabric of the U.S. since the first Black folk got off of boats in 1619. That Black farm work has been crucial to the building of this nation, and that particularly in August, when we talk about Black August, it's important for us to remember that when we talk about Black farmers, we're not just talking about something that's only good for Black people. We're talking about making sure that rural communities and people that have been central to the U.S. economy and social fabric can continue to thrive doing what it is that they have done. So this is why this is the second in our series on Black farmers in specific this August. And with that said, let's move to talk a little bit about what we're here for, conservation. So I am not going to lie, before I started learning about the Farm Bill, I was like, I don't understand what is conservation, what is happening. And when we talk about conservation in the U.S. Farm Bill and conservation in U.S. agriculture, you know, we're talking not just about sort of the most basic questions of fossil fuels, so that is part of it. We're not just talking about, say, going organic, though that is part of it. We're talking about three crucial parts of the Farm Bill. We're talking about the conservation title, we're talking about the forestry title, we're talking about the energy title, where we talk about renewable energy, and we're talking about where a lot of decisions are made about what initiatives are funded, what projects are supported, what funds are available to farmers working on the ground. And so that said, today when we talk about conservation, we're starting from that idea that conservation and agriculture are not opposed, they're deeply integrated. And I want to really make sure we talk about some key terms here. I'm going to throw it out to my experts, Mr. Freddie Davis and Seanicaa Edwards, because I'm still not an expert on this. Regenerative and sustainable agriculture, right? We hear these terms a lot when we talk about conservation and agriculture. And, I want to really get a chance to talk about regenerative and sustainable agriculture and what the history is of regenerative and sustainable agriculture in Black farming. What does the emphasis on regenerative agriculture mean right now for Black farmers and ranchers who are working on the ground, right? We hear a lot about these ideas. What does this mean for the Black farmers y'all are working with? And what challenges are they hitting? I'm going to throw this to Seanicaa, and then I have some other questions, Freddie, that I want to ask you about this in the context of other aspects of conservation.
Sure, I think that's a great question, Sarah. And I always chuckle when people ask, like, what is regenerative agriculture? Because there is not really a good definition for it. Depending on who you're talking to, that definition is going to change. And also, depending on who you're talking to, people use regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and climate smart agriculture interchangeably. They are all a little bit different, but they fall under this umbrella and they work hand in hand. Regenerative agriculture has a focus on soil health and soil quality and water quality, a lot of efficiencies. Sustainable agriculture incorporates that also, but it's looking at longevity and overall productivity over the long term. And so I think it's important for us to understand that these terms are being thrown around here lately, I'll say the past maybe 5 to 10 years, buzzwords, but it's not new. It's not new for a lot of the farmers, specifically African American farmers, Black farmers, indigenous farmers. If you think back from a historical standpoint, before we got into using synthetic chemicals and things of that nature, we were farming regeneratively. We were farming using, ancestral knowledge and different types of pathways. So now that it's a buzzword and, people can stamp it on this and that, you're getting more attention, but it's not necessarily something new for Black farmers that are on the ground. Now, over time, many farmers have um, transition to maybe using more conventional techniques, but the roots of the farming mechanism that they're currently using to this day still stand in regenerative agriculture. So now we're in a position, and I'm pretty sure everyone on this call has heard about climate smart commodity programs, all of these regenerative agricultural programs that are opening opportunities, so to speak, for farmers. However, now we're in a situation where a lot of farmers are feeling a little bit of a pinch from that because there is a cost associated to transitioning from one agricultural system to another. I always hear conversations where it seems as if, oh, we can just make this change instantaneously and there's no issue, but that is not the case. There are costs associated with it. There are also some productivity costs that are associated with it in the beginning before you actually see a return on that investment, a return to optimal soil health. All of these things are coming into play. What I'm seeing from a top level position is that a lot of the focus is on large scale ag. And so our smallholder farmers are being left out of the conversation. There are not as many programs directed towards them with the opportunities to generate additional funds, revenue streams as a result of that, because everything tends to be focused more on, oh, if we can look at the large scale producers and commit them to transitioning to regenerative, then we can have a bigger bang for our buck. However, I don't think that is the most accurate depiction of what we should think about when we're talking about regenerative agriculture and minority communities, not just Black communities, but all minority communities, and what that means for those smallholder farmers and medium-sized farmers as well. So I think there present some opportunities there, but there's still those challenges that we need to face, and that means making sure that we meet these farmers where they are, that there is funding available in the ideas around micro grants or things of that nature to make sure that they are positioning themselves to be successful with these transition costs, and then also making sure that there are markets available. So now that we know consumers are so conscious about where their food comes from, they want it grown organically, they want it grown consciously, they want it grown regenerative. We need to make sure that these regenerative practices that are being implemented, that those dollars get back to the farmer, that it goes back to the farm level, and that the farmers are able to, ensure that there's economic viability, not just in terms of, hey, I need to make sure that I'm able to continue to operate, but also looking at it from a standpoint of generating generational wealth through additional land acquisition, positioning themselves so that they can expand their farms or even preparing to transition to the next generation. So I think, I don't want the conversation around regenerative agriculture to get lost in large scale ag and forgetting about our small to medium sized farmers, and to forget about our Black farmers who are also in a position where they have the knowledge, they've been doing it. As you mentioned, Black farmers are the fabric of American agriculture. When you think about it, and you look at it from a historical standpoint, who was farming? When we were brought to this country, our ancestors were brought to this country, it was for our agricultural knowledge. It was not just for labor. And a lot of the cash crops that we have in this country right now are a result of being grown in indigenous Africa and not necessarily in Europe. So that whole transition from Africa here brings about the thought of the knowledge base lies, and a lot of that knowledge, and I'm sure Freddie can attest to this, a lot of farmers, they have stories being passed down from generation to generation. I remember my father telling me stories about how he chose to do things because that's how his dad taught him, and that's how his dads taught him. So that generation or institutional knowledge that lies with a lot of our producers is very important, and it should be cherished, but it should also be at the forefront of the regenerative agriculture movement.
Yes, like, first of all, yes, absolutely. And I think, Seanicaa, a couple things that you're pointing out here are just so important. I remember we were talking to Mr. Ben Burkett during our Pointing the Farm Bill to Racial Justice Summit last May, and he was saying how, he went off to school and he came back and he was telling his family, like, Ag Extension, USDA Extension is telling me we need to use this technology, we need to use this technology, and all these things that are. And these are the very same things that we now know, right? Those Green Revolution inputs, those things that bunches of farmers went into debt to start using, to use the technologies, to buy the equipment, now are the very things that they're moving back away from toward the ancestral ways that they were already farming. That knowledge that comes out of Black communities, Indigenous communities, long-standing communities of color. And I think it's so important for us to remember that what serves agribusiness and corporate farming is never going to be what is also going to serve the kinds of actual rural communities that we're talking about here. So speaking of farmers and this knowledge, I do want to shout out for a minute. We're seeing lots of folks from Mississippi joining the live stream. I'm betting that these are our Federation colleagues and comrades. Thank you for joining. We are so thrilled to have you here, and hope you enjoy it. And on that note, I'm going to turn over, in fact, to Mr. Freddie Davis and ask you, so let's take this to the realm of specifically agroforestry and forestry stewardship. We've talked a lot about how there's a push towards sustainable agroforestry and an emphasis on initiatives for forestry stewardship. How is this affecting the Black farmers and foresters that you are working with? And what struggles are folks facing in this kind of move? What resources do they need? What are you seeing, Freddie, on the ground?
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks. I think Seanicaa really outlined the issues and opportunities with our people when it comes to agriculture. And a lot of those can be, I could just forward that on to forestry and agroforestry, the practices and how our people used to do things. We talk about agroforestry like it's something new, but I could almost guarantee that most of us, when we walked through pastures, it was pastures full of trees. When I grew up, there weren't these vast pastures within our communities. There were very little vast pastures, meadows of just grass. It was forestry integrated into the grazing operations. The small scale the vegetable operations and things like that. There was always a component of forest with our agricultural practices integrated into them. And it's when Seanicaa, you mentioned that knowledge and that passing down the knowledge. I think one of the things that happened with our people is that passing down the knowledge, that knowledge has been devalued. So a lot of it that we used hasn't been passed because it was devalued at some point and figured to not be productive and not be sustainable. So when we start now, as we transition back to doing the things that and now it's good. So it's a challenge to start adopting the things that we ran from kind of as a people, because it was not saw as being thought of as being sustainable. So what we're seeing now as markets evolve, as we evolved into more evolved into this capitalist system, that especially forestry wise, the scale that we practice forestry, it is hard to generate the revenue that's needed to justify the ownership of forest land right now. The capital that it takes to run a forestry operation. When I go back to when I was talking about the pastures and the forest that was in it. There on most of those farms, there was a small logging operation on that farm that could take advantage of the forest resources that was tied in with the grazing. The vegetable production or whatever that might be, alley cropping. So, but we don't have access to the equipment needs and access to those markets to take advantage of forestry. So I think that's where the opportunity is, I think, and that's where the challenge is when it comes to forestry is how do we generate if I was to go back and tell my grandfather that this is the challenge is how do we generate revenue from trees, he would look at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you talking about? That is the resource. That's our living bank. But now the challenge is how do we generate revenue from our forest resources? Now there's opportunity there now to generate revenue. There's a recognized value that the trees add to the ecosystem, recognized values to the environment as a whole and climate mitigation. But one of the things that we've got to be conscious of, and really when we start advocating for policies and things like that, is how do we make those opportunities scalable to the size operations that our producers have right now? How do we make that work and be scalable? It's to go back to what Seanicaa said. A lot of the policies, a lot of things are focused on large landowners, large land ownership that affect that get more bang for your buck. But when we start taking into consideration things like biodiversity, and then looking at the social aspect of what forest land provides to the communities, we've got to advocate to capture those values that the forest land offer, to make it more appealing and make it to where we can afford forest land, afford to have a working forest, or make the opportunities for that working forest to work for that landowner. So I think those are the opportunities, those are the challenges, along with the opportunities that we have when it comes to forest land and ownership of forest land and practicing agroforestry. There's a heavy focus now with USDA programs around promoting forest land, promoting agroforestry. But are those programs, one of the things we need to be sure of is that those programs are programs that fit our farmers, that fit our forest landowners. As a federation, our membership averages about 40 acres forest. Our forest landowners are about 40 acres. That's considerably small for forest land when you start looking at the scale of something that's viable financially. So we've got to advocate for policies that are supportive of that, and it's not necessarily that we need to support or advocate for policies that are, well, if the 1,000-acre landowner's getting $100 an acre incentive, then we need to get $100 acre incentive also. No, our 40 acres is more valuable than that 1,000 acres, and we've got to, so we might need $300 an acre in order to make it financially viable for our producers. And And those are the things that we've got to recognize as we're advocating. And, for those organizations that might be on and might be listening, and those people that are advocating, it's not, we don't need what's equal out there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't,
Right.
that's not going to work for us. That's not going to work. So we don't need
Equitable.
to advocate for that. We need to be equitable, correct? But we can't, we've got to actually figure what that value is on our land. And I think, those are the things that we're working toward as an organization is, making this thing where our landowners can afford and retain the land that they have, and actually, not just retain it, but now we went through all of those terms, right? We talked about climate smart, sustainability, and regenerative. I think we're kind of stuck on sustaining when we talk about Black land ownership. Let's start talking
Expand.
yeah, let's start talking about expanding, and we can't convince the next generation to purchase land if they can't see where they're making a profit from it. So those access to markets, whether those be traditional markets, ecosystem services markets, we've got to have access, and those markets have got to be markets that understands, the value of the products that we're producing from our forest resources.
I love this. And so I want to really emphasize the connection that, Seanicaa, you and Freddie both really pointed to here, which is that it is not enough to just be able to figure out how to, own your land and work your land and grow things on it in ways that are sustainable for both the landowners and the, communities in the earth. If there is no access to markets, if there is no access to places to put specialty crops, to be able to, place agroforestry production, to be able to sell your, highly valued goods, then there is no way to actually grow or even sustain, but especially to grow. And I think that this question of market access is one that I want to turn to for a minute, Seanicaa, to have you talk a little bit about the work that Freedman Heirs is doing around increasing market access. But I also, I want to just emphasize here that one of the things that I think you're both really pointing to, because I don't think we're going to have enough time to talk about it in great length, so I'm just going to say, one of the things you're both pointing to is one of the big problems with the proposed farm bill that's, coming out right now of the House, is that it makes what is already a problem worse. It makes even more of the conservation funding targeted toward large-scale agribusiness and corporations and less attentive to the specific needs of small farmers, BIPOC farmers, the farmers who have already been marginalized and are doing this incredibly valuable work, right? So we're seeing less and less opportunities. And I think, also I just really want to emphasize what you all are pointing to, that it's not about, special treatment or special interest. That when we talk about set-asides and funding for small farmers, for African-American farmers, for, structurally disadvantaged farmers, what we are talking about is recognizing that there's a long history of exploitation and exclusion for small farmers of color, small Black farmers, small Indigenous and Asian farmers as well. And that there's a very different economic system at work here that requires different funding mechanisms. So this is where your expertise is key. I want to turn to Seanicaa here for a minute, and then I want to go back to Freddie. So I'm going to put them both out so I don't have to talk twice, so we can really get to you all.
Okay.
Seanicaa, tell me about this access to markets. And Freddie, one of the things that I first got super turned on to about the RTRC is the work that you're doing with Black landowners in biofuel as a totally new kind of market for agroforestry, and the production of biofuel is a different kind of project toward climate and conservation. So I'd love to hear both of you talk about those before we wrap up. And for those of you who have other questions and things you wish we had gotten to, I am going to point you to the comments section where we've got folks like Mr. Ben Burkett, like Dania Davey, like folks who are far more expert than me, who are happy to apparently answer your questions in the comments. So please keep that incredibly rich conversation going in the comments as well. Let's do Seanicaa first. Seanicaa, talk about market access, and then we're going to go to Mr. Freddie.
Okay.
Biofuels.
Absolutely. One of my favorite subjects to talk about. I love to talk about markets. So I have a couple of bullet points to piggyback off of what Freddie mentioned in his earlier segment, and it kind of ties into the market opportunity or market access. When I was growing up, my dad used to always tell me and my brother, no farmer puts seeds in the ground to not have a market to sell it to. So that became my fascination with markets and what that actually meant, which led to becoming an ag economist. So over the study of just the history of Black agriculture in America, part of the problem, as you mentioned, Sarah, was denied access to market, denied access to capital, denied access to land acquisition. And so that has been one of the major barriers to overcoming the systemic discrimination that Black farmers in this country have faced. So for me, it's very personal. We are working diligently at Freedmen Heirs Foundation to help bridge that gap, meaning, okay, what are the market opportunities and what are the ones that are equitable for Black farmers? And if those opportunities aren't equitable, where can we create demand or create market opportunities within different communities? One of the things I know, like in the Mississippi Delta that's not too far from me, you have food deserts, but you have huge land farmers farming in that area. Why is that the case? So definitely thinking through how can we rectify that? How can we make sure that these farmers that are growing crops, specialty crops, have an outlet for that and that they're paid an equitable price? Freddie mentioned in his talk, advocating for policy changes that are equitable. Well, one of the projects that we're currently working on in conjunction or collaboration with Resources for the Future and the Food and Agriculture Foundation is we are working on pinpointing what are the barriers to transitioning to regenerative agricultural practices for minority farmers. So with that will come recommendations when you have a report that can actually say what the cost is. So that goes back to what Freddie was saying. Hey, it might be $100 for a large scale farmer, but for a Black farmer, it may be a different cost structure. And so making sure that we are doing projects that actually put data and numbers behind what we're advocating for and pushing for to make sure that policymakers are informed about the decisions around the community, and also making sure that we have voices at the table to advocate and to bring in the needs and the desires of those farmers that are on the ground every day. It's one thing, I think, for policymakers to make decisions, but they're not the ones that are actually doing the farming. They're not the ones that are, feeling the discrimination, that are feeling the inequities. So it's not a one size fits all. Conservation is not a one size fit all. And so we should definitely be taking time to look at what those different metrics are, how they are affected in different minority communities. For us, we're focusing on Black farmers. And then how can we develop markets around that are equitable and that are socially responsible and that also have longevity. Again, as Freddie mentioned, how can we bring along the next generation when they don't see success and they don't see an opportunity to be successful? So making sure that we have, I think the market component piece of that is very important. And then that also feeds into having access to additional streams of income, which will help in solidifying or land acquisition that will also support with access to capital. These things all work in tandem with each other. I like to call them like it's the perfect trifecta. But I think so many times access to markets gets looked over, but it's very key to the future of Black farmers in this country. And we need to make sure that we are advocating for equitable market access along with all of the other barriers that we hear about, land access, land tenure, air property issues, title clearance. All of those are important, and we need to continue to advocate for them, but we also need to continue to advocate for equitable market access.
Absolutely. Thank you, Seanicaa Edwards. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Freddie Davis. Talk to me about other ways. Yes.
Most definitely. To get on my soapbox for just a minute, look, we have got the resources now, or we're resources out there now to address a lot of the equality issues with Black landowners. It's a lot of resources there. I think it's our responsibility to use those resources to build systems. And you know, I'm kind of leery as to if we're doing that right now. I think we need to use those resources to build systems. Equity is good, but equity wasn't a conversation when we had our own systems. When we had our own systems, it didn't need to be a conversation. We had a system there that supported our viability. So I think that it's our responsibility to use the resources that we have now to build systems that's going to be sustainable when we don't have resources. So those are some of the things and as we talk marketing, let's look at the whole system. Let's not have the conversation around, well, we're able to get in market X and they're providing the market and we're having to go through all of these steps with other entities to get there. Let's address that entire system, from our farmers, from our forest landowners to the end user. Let's look at that system and see where we can be integrated into that. You know, a lot of the things are moving really fast right now. So while they're, you know, we don't have it's a pressure to do that now. It's easier to go with things that are established rather than establish systems within our communities. But we've got to work hard to look at those consultants that's within our communities, look at those resources that's within our communities as we're addressing these marketing issues. But right now we're doing forest landowners, that when we talk about that knowledge being devalued, that led to devalued forests. And a lot of our forest landowners right now in the U.S. South have got forest resources. Low value forest products is a big part of it. So as an organization, you know, we recognize that we've got to do something with that low value forest. With those materials, we've got to get that forest back healthy. So that for us, that's okay. We've got to have a market for those materials, because the cost of just starting over without having a market it's hard. Financially, it's just not feasible. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at creating biomass markets for that low value forest materials. And looking at creating that support system to support those forest landowners from the forest to whatever that end product is. You know, from the trucking to the purchasing. You know, not just providing that market for that landowner. It's looking at that whole system. And so we're working through that right now as an organization. And we've got some commitments to create markets and things like that. That we're working through to provide biomass markets to assist those landowners with generating income as well as creating a forest that's healthy and providing either a forest product or ecosystem services or a combination of the both along with recreation. So that's what we're doing in that area now, and we're super excited about it. I think there'll be more to talk about as we get farther along with the projects that we're working on. But we see biomass as being an opportunity for forest landowners right now, and it's one that we see as being something that's going to inevitably be good for the climate, because our options now are to push it up and burn it, or to chip it up or something like that, and we're not getting any use from it. Our landowners not getting any use, nor is the population as a whole getting any benefit from us releasing more carbon into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. I want to just close out here because I know we've got a lot of folks who have got places to get back to, but I want to thank first and foremost Tandelyn Daniel, Seanicaa Edwards, and Mr. Freddie Davis III for your incredible expertise, your willingness to sit down with me and talk to me about these issues that you all have such passion, commitment, and expertise around. All of the folks from Mississippi all the way up to DC and beyond who joined us for this conversation and who are interested in these issues. And I especially want to wrap up our Black August programming around the Farm Bill and Black and African American farmers by reminding you folks, as Daniel Davies said in our comments here, that questions of reparations most broadly for Black folk in the U.S. cannot be separated from questions not just of racial justice, but of land justice and climate justice, right? That these are all the ways in which we ensure equity. And also to sort of go back to something that Dr. Jasmine Jackson said last week when we were talking to the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, that Black self-determination, as Mr. Freddie Davis was just saying, is the ultimate goal. It's not just enough to ask to be treated equally, but that really what we need is the freedom and autonomy to make sure that we thrive. And that in turn will make sure that everyone thrives. So if you've enjoyed this conversation, you want to send a friend to it, you can see it in about a little less than a week when it goes up on the reel and on our YouTube. And if you want to hear more, next week is the last week of our Instagram Live series. We're going to be meeting with folks from Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, talking about farm work, gender, justice, and the Farm Bill. It's going to be an incredible conversation, and we are really excited. And for those of you who want to come to our live event in Washington or watch it on Instagram, it'll be right here at American University's Washington College of Law with Dr. April Love from the Policy Institute at Alcorn State, Dania Davey formerly from the Federation, in fact, and University of Vermont Law and Oxfam, and lots of other folks, young farmers, other organizations. Please join in on September 18th at 5:30. And thanks so much to all of you. We'll see you soon.